All right, we are back to talk about approximants. All right, so again, this is a group of sounds composed of two categories of sounds, or liquids and or glides. And so these are sounds that are produced with a narrow constriction in the oral cavity, but it's narrow, but not to the point of having that turbulent airflow that's characteristic of our fricatives. So they have free flowing air, so it's not so noisy as associated with our fricatives. And our approximants have both central airflow, as with our W and our ya, but then we also have our one lateral sound, our L. So we have both central and lateral airflow in our approximate category. And again, we have the liquids, which are the L and the R, and the glides, which are the W and the ya. So let's start with the with our liquids. All right. So our L is easily categorized as an alveolar sound for the most part. Usually that's how I would categorize our L. We'll talk about when it's maybe not such an alveolar type production. The R, I'm never going to ask you the place of articulation on R because it changes so much depending on how somebody produces it. You could categorize its place of articulation in many different positions in your oral cavity. And I guess to a point, potentially you could call it a palatal-alveolar sound, but I won't ask you exactly. It really does depend on where that sound is, and it's really going to be dependent on the sounds that are being produced around it. All right. But again, as they are sonants, they are both voiced. And again, the L is the one lateral sound, so that is its one, really striking characteristic. It's the one lateral approximant, but the lateral liquid. And again, an R is a central approximant. All right, L, sound you're going to work on often in treatment. Often I refer to as the lollipop sound or the la 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 sound. As a lateral sound, it is made with complete contact between your tongue, between the tongue and hard palate. I don't know if I'd call it the tongue and hard palate. I would definitely say more your tongue and your alveolar ridge. All right, let's maybe make a little note about that. Your tongue and alveolar ridge, because that's usually where you're putting it. Alveolar ridge-ish. You can produce the L behind your top teeth. I've seen kids produce the L with their tongue between their teeth. I've seen the L being produced many different places, but ideally you want your tongue somewhere around your alveolar ridge. And what happens is you want the air to flow off the sides of the tongue. Students describe lateral airflow often. I understand what they're saying, but they're not using the correct terminology. The air is flowing off of the tongue. It's not flowing out of the tongue. The tongue does not have holes, and the air is not flowing out of the tongue. It is flowing off of the tongue. It's flowing along the sides of the tongue. But the air is coming out of the mouth, and it is flowing off of the sides of the tongue. Okay, that is what's happening. That hence the lateral airflow. It's coming off of the sides of the tongue. All right, so just make sure you have the right terminology for describing what is happening. All right, so make sure you got it. All right, and so in terms of the L, we'll talk about word final L's, or I guess more syllable final L's in a second, but lots of L's. Mall, linoleum, whale, apple, fellow, calves. It's not say calves, calves. The L's not really there. Lullaby, flotilla, helm, sociable. So sometimes those L's aren't really produced, so it's just something to pay attention to. Again, as a sound that we work on a lot in treatment, make sure you're picking good sounds or good words for treatment. All right, L's often in clusters that we're going to work on in treatment. So again, pick nice cluster words that are useful and functional for our kids. The R, all right, lots of different ways you can talk about the R: the growling bear sound, the growling dog sound, just the growling sound, the car sound, the motorcycle sound. Lots of different ways you can talk about it. Again, key point when you come up with these labels for your words, make it something that works for your kids. Sometimes I had one little girl, her name was Rebecca. We called it the Rebecca sound. Whatever works for your kids. So work out a bunch of different options and let your kids pick one, something that they like. All right. And just remember what it is, because if you have 10 kids working on R, make sure you got the right label for each kid. Write it down somewhere. All right. And again, as an approximant, there is no actual contact, right, between your tongue and any passive articulator, right? So there's no, that's part of the reason why the R is tricky. There's no place for that tongue to actually touch your hard palate, soft palate. So we want to make sure, so that makes it hard for the kids to get in the exact right spot. So that's what makes that R a little bit trickier for them to find the correct spot for their placement. But again, the air has to flow over the middle of the tongue. Well, I guess there is some placement of the tongue. One of the key points I think that often people forget about with the tongue, we often talk about making a cherry bowl, right, with the tongue, where the sides of your tongue have to touch the molars, the inside molars of your tongue. So we want this, if this is your tongue, the sides of your tongue, the back sides of your tongue have to touch the molars. So if those touch your back molars, and you smile, that forces the airflow to come down the middle. So if the sides of your tongue are touching those molars, that air is forced to come down the middle, and we have a nice, good placement of your tongue for the R, actually, as well as for your S, if you want to know about that. So that's really what we want for the R. That is a very different placement, obviously, than what we see here. But that's usually how, honestly, I teach my R, is to have them form a cherry bowl, a butterfly, whatever you want to think about it, but with the tongue tip the tongue sort of dipping down in the middle with the sides of the tongue up and touching the molars. That's how I like to have their tongue touching in their mouth, and that's how their airflow goes out, and that's gets their tongue in a good position. But the key point is the tongue has to be anchored, and that also gets the tongue up high, because often what happens is the tongue isn't high enough and it drops down, and that's what gets the oh sound. If you think about it, if you go oh, feel where your tongue is. It's not touching those molars. Oh, and you just look at where my mouth is. Oh, you can see how my lower jaw is dropped. Oh, but if I go you can see how my jaw lifts up, and my tongue is touching those top molars, so it has to raise up. So if the tongue is touching those molars, the tongue is up higher, right? So it's something to think about, getting that tongue up high and touching those molars, and that just gets it in a better position to produce that type sound. All right, R, again, sound you're probably going to work on more than any other sound in treatment if you're going to work with kids. So we will become well acquainted. Here we're talking mainly, well, it's not just prevocalic, we got all sorts. Remember, don't forget about those rhotics. So we got prevocalic as well as rhotics here. Rap, rye, scar, there's the R. Report, so you got a prevocalic as well as an OR. Rubber as well, you got the prevocalic as well as the schwa. War, or, there's the OR as well as a cluster. Wardrobe, rye, there's a prevocalic. Gar, there's the R, garden. Before, there's an OR. Endear, the small cap I, R, dear, ear. All right, and again, there's multiple ways to articulate, and we should say articulate the prevocalic R. All right, so we briefly talked long ago about the retroflex, the apical, basically your tongue tip flipped up and back. And the way to teach that usually is, I talk to my kids about having like a fake jar of peanut butter or pudding, and we have pudding here, and we're going to put it on the top of our mouth. So we dip, and we put it on the top of our mouth all the way back, and we get our tongue tip up, and we're going to lick it all the way back. And get them, so that teaches them how to practice getting their tongue tip up and pulling it all the way back. And so it teaches them how to pull their tongue up and back. The thing is, you do this a couple times. The thing is, if you do that, and you can see it even here in the picture, you see what happens? Look at where the back of this tongue is. You see how far down, how far it's dropped. And I feel that when you do that, you can get a good sound if you do the apical, and pull that tongue back and go I feel though, you drop it and you don't get a very good R because that back of the tongue is dropped so far back. You really have to work at it. All right. Again, the key point is you want to get that back of the tongue up high. Once you know how to do it, sure, you can go ahead and do that. But if you don't know how to do it, when you look it back, you just go, oh, right? You can see how easy it is for the kids to just drop that tongue down and everything drops and they just cannot get their tongue in a good spot, right? And so your alternate option, instead of doing the tongue tip up and back, is to do that bunched R, which I think in general, you can think about how you do it, but I think in general I do more bunched R productions, and probably you do too. The key point with bunched R productions is you have a lot more constriction, in your palatal area, as well as you actually have more constriction here in your pharyngeal area as well. You're not closing it off, but you're making this constriction. You're making it smaller and tighter. And you're just making it smaller and tighter. And in both types of productions, you can or cannot, produce the R's with your lips rounded. You can go or you can go You can round or not round your R's. I, in general, try to teach my kids to produce their R's with their lips spread for two reasons. One, it gives their tongue a lot more tension, because when you smile, that spreads your tongue out. And if I want their tongue to touch their teeth, to get, to spread it out and get their tongue touching those molars, it really helps if their tongue is spread out, and it'll spread out a lot more if they're smiling, right? And also, they usually tend to be producing a W instead of an R. And so if they're rounding with an they're just so much more likely to produce a W when their lips are rounded. So for a variety of reasons, I try to teach them to say their R's with their lips rounded. And so because of that, one of the last sounds I want to work on with them is an OR, right? Because you pretty much have to produce ORs with your lips rounded, all right? So that's just my own strategy. I usually work on prevocalic ers, and then work through other rhotics as necessary, as needed. But I work on the prevocalic ers at the lip spread, and again with the tongue, touching those back molars. That's sort of my approach, but it may or may not work for you, and it doesn't always work immediately with the kids that I work with either, but that's just how I do it. All right. It's just a process. It's not going to be an overnight fix, I promise you. And especially with a kid who's 10, right, who's been doing this incorrectly for many years, it's a long process to teach them the right way to do something, right? But again, these are prevocalic, and obviously if you're working on the rhotics, usually what I do, again, I'm counting them at that point to be able to produce an So then how I do it is I break it up. I go or, I, e, So I count on them just to basically do the vowel and then the and then eventually if they can do or, and then eventually do it faster, and then we squish it together. That's usually how I approach it. But you can do it other ways too, but maybe they can figure it out. And after you do one or two, then maybe it's just an easy fix. But that's how I've approached it. All right. So in terms of transcription variants, you're going to see this in my transcriptions. Usually I'm lazy, all right? And you've seen it already in the slides. Usually I'm going to transcribe the R, as the right side up R. You've seen it. Normally that's how I do it. The appropriate IPA transcription for is the upside down R, right? And sometimes when I want to be appropriate, I do use the upside down R, right? I use them usually interchangeably, okay? I need you to understand that the right side up R actually refers to a trill, right? A single trill, in the Spanish trill. So in the word like perro, all right? All right, so that is technically what this refers to, all right? Obviously, if there's no ambiguity, because none of the kids we're transcribing are speaking Spanish, they're not using Spanish trills. So there's no ambiguity as to whether they're saying a Spanish trill or just an we can use that. Obviously, if I have a Spanish speaker, you would really want to be making sure you're using the two appropriately. But usually I'm using them interchangeably for your assignments. I am hoping you're going to be using the upside down R, and I've given you that to copy as necessary. Just to be, let's just be precise. Why not, right? But just, it's just sort of a note here, note of caution, or a note of edification, right, about what's going on. All right. Let's also talk about the L. As I said, our L can also be produced with secondary velar articulation, also, the velarization. So as we know, we refer to our L as an alveolar production. So place articulation of an L, I want you to think about it as an alveolar production. But at the ends of syllables, as well as the ends of words, L's are considered to be velarized. So just think about, let's just say a word lip. No, just say the word pill. Think about what do you do with your tongue for lip versus pill. The back of your tongue for pill raises up. You feel that, and they sound different. And let's say the word little, and see how your tongue what happens to your tongue, and let's listen to how the L sounds. It sounds different for the two. Little, right? The two L's sound different. We have the light L at the beginning, and we have the dark L at the end. All right, the dark L is also referred to as the velar L. All right, so the velar L, dark L. All right, so this symbol, that little tilde in the middle, that's referred to as the velar L. Okay. So actually, this is little with a flap. That's how I said it. Little. All right, so we got that. So we have that velar production at the ends of L's. That's just what happens. That's typically how those syllable final, word final L's are produced. And as I mentioned with our nasals, our L's are also syllabic in word final positions. So again, those L's are also, they can be syllabic. So we have bubble, fickle, and to a point, our R's are also syllabic. So essentially our schwars are considered to be syllabic, but our schwars are, they are also, they essentially also do contain a vowel, so they're in a slightly different category than just an L, because they do have a vowel as well as an R, so they're slightly different category. But the L's, if we put the syllabic function, syllabic, diacritic below them, they can actually function as as a syllable by themselves. Bubble, fickle. So again, sometimes our velar L's can be syllabic, right? Not all velar L's are syllabic, but all syllabic L's are velar. Did you get that? Let's try it one more time. Not all velar L's are syllabic, but all syllabic L's are velar. All right, got that? It's sort of a sort of a one-way street that way. All right, so we got some transcription here of our liquids. So you can go ahead and transcribe these, with dictionary.com if you would like. And I'm going to stop here, and we'll do glides on our next one.